Hi, everyone. So those of us who know and love Chris have been really holding space for his amazing work here at WDS and his ability to really show up for all of us here. But I wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge the real vulnerability and transparency of what's been going on in this community this weekend, and acknowledge that this is a very human experience for all of us. So I wanted to just ask everyone here, if anybody here has ever been through anything like Lewis Howes was talking about, anything like Megan is talking about, anything like Jeremy's talking about or Chris is talking about, where you've had a real loss or real heartbreak or been violated in some way. I'd just like to ask, because Megan was talking about bearing witness, and I think that's such an incredibly powerful message, to just let it be okay that sometimes we feel sad and angry and violated and frustrated and hurt and betrayed and disappointed and all of that. So I just wanted to ask, as a show of solidarity, if anybody in this room who has ever felt that way would stand up. And I'd like to ask Chris and Jolie just to come on stage for just a moment. And Lewis and Megan and Jeremy, wherever you are as well, I just want you to see for just a moment how human it is to go through something like this. Thank you. And I would like to ask you all to just join me. You know, the only way we get through these kinds of things is through some sort of grace. We can't do it with will. We can't do it by, bucking up and strong-arming our way through it. We do it through grace. So I just wanted to ask if you would join me for a moment and sing with me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. And if we could all just close our eyes for just a moment and take a moment of silence to honor anything that's in the room that's in need of healing. And let us just call on all of the angels and all of the spirits and all of those that we've lost to be here with us and to hold space for us and to offer us the amazing grace that makes the heart whole. And thank you all for the vulnerability and the courage to keep your heart open in spite of these difficult times. So go ahead and open your eyes, and let's have one more round of free hugs. Thank you, everybody. So I want to transition into talking to you about something that is really near and dear to my heart, which is finding and fulfilling your calling. And I remember talking about this with Chris. I don't know, this was probably 5 years ago. We were both on book tours. And we were sitting at a coffee shop, and I said something about, I'm really trying to live my life in alignment with my calling. And he pulled out his notebook and he wrote down the word calling. He said, I like that. And, we don't talk much about the word calling in most career kinds of gatherings. But it's a word that I have had a lot of resonance with. Because for me, I found my calling very young, and it was very much a spiritual calling. I was called to medicine the way priests are called to the priesthood. And I'm meeting lots of people on earth these days that feel the same way about their jobs, their careers. So I was really struggling with my own sense of life purpose a while back, and I'll tell you more about why. But I wanted to start with another question, and this comes from one of my mentors, Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. I was taking a workshop with her for doctors, and she asked us in the room, she said, tell me, how old were you when you discovered that the life of another human being or animal or plant mattered? How old were you when you discovered that life mattered? That another life mattered? She said, were you 20 to 25? Raise your hands if anybody was over 25. Anybody over 25? Anybody, I see some hands. Anybody 20 to 25 when you discovered that another life mattered? How about 15 to 20? What about 10 to 15? How many of you were less than 10? Look around. I had a feeling this would be the distribution in this room. What Rachel told us is she said that is a very specific question that applies to healers. And she said, I assumed, because she has been teaching doctors for many years, she said, I assumed that would apply to any profession. She said, so I got asked to go and speak at Harvard Law School. And I got up in front of all these lawyers and I asked the same question, and nobody raised their hand. And she was there with meditation teacher Jack Kornfield, and he leaned over and he said, Rachel, try justice. And she said, how old were you when you first discovered that the world was unjust and you wanted to make it right? And they had the same distribution. They were all less than 10 when the lawyers discovered this sense of purpose around justice. And she said every profession has its own question. But I had a feeling that there were going to be an inordinate number of healers in the room. When you start talking to software engineers and accountants, it's things like order. How old were you when you discovered that the world needed more order? So you might ask yourself, what is that question for you? What is that thing that you discovered when you were less than 10 that started pulling you forth like this rope into your calling? I was 7 years old when my parents hired a chimney sweep to come and sweep our chimney. And the chimney sweep found a little nest of baby squirrels. There were 4 of them. They were so tiny, they had no hair and their eyes were fused, and their mother was gone. And my mother thought this would be a good time to teach me sort of a facts about life kind of moment of, the mother is gone, these babies are really little, so they're going to die because they don't have their mother, and that's just how nature works. And I was having none of that. I was like, you are taking me to the veterinarian, and we are going to save these babies. And so God bless my parents. My father's a physician. My mother's a school teacher. They took me to the veterinarian with this little nest of baby squirrels, and I was so earnest. I was like, you have to help me learn how to save these babies. And so the veterinarian taught me what I would need to do. I would need to put them in an incubator with cotton and feed them every 2 hours with an eyedropper with dog's milk and wipe their little bellies so they could go to the bathroom. And so I was on it. I was every 2 hours. I had my alarm clock set. I got permission to go to school with this little bag with my 4 little babies and my eyedropper and my dog's milk, and all the teachers were kind of on board for this weird little girl that was carrying squirrels around in her... And I was getting up at night like I was a new mother every 2 hours to feed these babies. And I was so impassioned. I was on a mission, and I was going to save these baby squirrels. And they lasted about a week. And one night I woke up and I went to feed the first baby, and it was cold. And within 24 hours, the other 3 had all died, and I was devastated. And I went to my mother and I said, Mom, this hurts too much. I don't ever want to see another squirrel. And she said, well, that's all right, if that's how you feel. And about a month later, somebody who had heard that Lissa Rankin takes care of injured baby squirrels showed up at our door with a little squirrel that had blood coming out of the side of its mouth. And it had fallen out of the tree onto the top of this car. And I went running to the door, and I was like, oh, there's another one. And this one was older. It had hair, and its eyes were open. I was so excited, like something in me was like dancing like a little girl. And I took that squirrel, and I raised that squirrel. And that squirrel survived all the way to becoming a little teenage squirrel, which became a little tricky. Because I had taught this squirrel, like I would put the squirrel on the ground and I would walk away from the squirrel, and the squirrel would run up my leg and sit on my shoulder. And this was great. This was awesome, right? But then we were out at the park and the squirrel started running up other people's legs and trying to sit on their shoulders. And that didn't go over as well. And then the squirrel started getting really, like, I had taught the squirrel to kiss me, and the squirrel started kissing other people and, like, making little bites in their cheeks. And then the squirrel started getting a bit aggressive, and the veterinarian told me, well, you know, that's because he's ready to meet little girly squirrels now. And so I had to let go of this squirrel. I had to take this squirrel to a rescue, to a park, and leave this squirrel there. And I put my squirrel on a tree. And I walked away just sobbing, like so heartbroken. And the squirrel's running after me, and I'm running, and the squirrel's running after me. And finally, I couldn't stand it, so the squirrel comes and sits on my shoulder. And we find this went on several times, and I finally had to get somebody else to hold the squirrel while I ran away. And it just broke my heart, and I sat in the car, and I told my mom again, I'm never going to do this again. I can't ever do that. I can't go through this again. It hurts too much to lose this little squirrel. And my mom said to me at the time, she said, Lissa, you're free to do whatever you need to do. Everybody's entitled to their own journey. She said, but as your mom, I would like to encourage you to give another squirrel permission to break your heart. And to give people permission to break your heart. And to give life permission to break your heart. So I ended up raising 22 squirrels. This is me at 16 in the newspaper. And do not comment on the cropped Guess jeans or... They called me the Squirrel Girl. And it was the beginning of my purpose. I was called to medicine the way some are called to the priesthood, and this was my calling. And I practiced on squirrels until I was old enough to go to medical school at 22, and then I started practicing on people. And it felt very purposeful to do this work. And yet, any of you who have ever been through medical school, and I know there are many of you in the audience, how many doctors here? Can you raise your hands? There's a lot of you, yeah. Anybody who's ever been through medical school or residency knows that medical school is trauma. It is trauma. And you are violated in every possible way. I mean, I was, working 72-hour call shifts, not sleeping at all, not getting to eat when I needed to eat, being sexually harassed everywhere I went. I had surgeons throwing bloody scalpels at me. I showed up with the flu one day and assumed that they would send me home because I was throwing up and severe diarrhea, and I was supposed to be operating that day. And they put an IV in my arm and pumped me full of Phenergan to make my nausea get better, gave me a liter of fluids, put a Depends diaper on me and told me I could poo my pants in the operating room. And I sat there and operated until I passed out when they put me on a gurney and took me into the recovery room and filled me full of more drugs and sent me back to the OR. And this is not unique to me. Every doctor in this room can tell you a similar story, especially if they did a surgical residency. So medical school is a trauma. And some of the deepest traumas were nights like the night that I had to deliver 4 dead babies. And I was a third-year resident. I was in charge of the board, all of labor and delivery. And one after the other, sequentially, I had to deliver these babies that had either died in utero and we had to bring them into the world through, putting the woman into labor, or they died right after birth. And by 4 o'clock in the morning, after the 4th baby had died, and I was so incapacitated, I had been crawling into bed with these women after delivering these babies and holding these babies and crying in the bed with these women. And my professor kept yelling at me, "Buck up, Rankin. You're never going to amount to anything unless you can get a thicker skin. Stop feeling so goddamn much." And after the last one, I couldn't hold it together anymore. And I was running into the locker room, and my professor was running after me, and these 2 midwives were running after him. And I ran into the women's locker room and closed the door behind me, and he was trying to get into the women's locker room, and these 2 midwives pushed him to the side and closed the door, and I was lying on the floor of the bathroom, and they kneeled down on the floor, and they held me in their arms, and they rocked me. And I'll never forget what one of them said. She said, "Lissa, don't ever let them break you." So fast forward almost 10 years, and I was in a busy medical practice with 4 other doctors, and I had done everything I could to keep the squirrel girl alive. But when I started my practice, I was expected to see 25 patients a day, which I thought was a lot. And by that time, I was expected to see 40 patients a day. And I felt like I was selling my soul every day. I knew that to be a healer, I needed time with people. I needed to sit at the bedside. I needed to hold their hands. I needed to be able to do what I did with those women when their babies had died. I needed to open my heart and be present and listen and love. Because, of course, medicine is an act of love. But it's really hard to practice that way when you're seeing 40 patients a day and when you're doing 72-hour call shifts and you're delivering 30 babies in a weekend. And one day, I was 6 months pregnant with my little girl, and I had been working a 72-hour call shift, and I had to go into the office on Monday morning after a long weekend, and I was signing off some papers, and in this box of papers that needed my signature was a letter. And I opened this letter, and it was from a patient of mine that I had known for several years, and she said, "Dr. Rankin, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I want to tell you my story because I think it's going to help other people." She said, I have a painful sexual disorder. It hurts when I have sex. And I haven't told anybody. I haven't told you, even though you've been my doctor for years. And my husband and I are about to break up because I can't have sex with him. And he told me if I didn't come and get help that he was going to leave me. She said, but I've been so embarrassed and so ashamed and so uncomfortable that I didn't tell anybody, but I made an appointment with you, and I had mustered up the nerve to tell you my story. She said, so I did what we women do when we come to the gynecologist. I put on my pretty dress. I got all spruced up down there. I came to the office. I'm waiting in the waiting room, and they're late getting me, and you're late getting there, and they finally put me in the room, and they make me take off my dress, and I'm wearing this paper gown, and I'm cold and uncomfortable, but I knew I could tell you. She said, and you walked in the room, and you were wearing scrubs, and they had blood on them. And you had your hair in a ponytail, and your eyes were all bloodshot, and I could tell that you'd been up probably all night. She said, I know you work really hard, and I didn't expect anything else, but I was waiting for one thing. I was just waiting for you to take your hand off the door, and you never did. And I got in my car, and I drove to the grocery store, and I was so distraught. I was like, what has become of me? What has become of me? And I'm standing in line, and the only thing that's keeping me from my well-deserved bed is this teenage kid who cannot scan my yogurt. And he's trying, and he's trying. And you can just see he's getting more and more anxious, and he cannot make it work. And I've been up for 72 hours, and my heart is breaking. And I hear myself, and I'm like standing outside of myself. It's one of these out-of-body experiences, and I'm standing outside of myself, and I'm watching this woman with this pimply teenage kid, and he's trying so hard. And I hear this woman, this horrible woman, I hear her say, if I did my job the way you did your job, there'd be dead people everywhere. And then I heard that midwife say, don't ever let them break you. And I was like, oh my God, they just broke me. And I got in my car with that yogurt. And I started driving home, and I'm driving kind of fast down the street. And I hit a squirrel. And I didn't stop. And I went home, and I was nearly suicidal. And then I had this thought. I was thinking, well, how would I do it? If I wanted to kill myself, how would I do it? And then I suddenly realized that I was 6 months pregnant. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even fucking kill myself. And I heard this little voice. And it was a different kind of voice than I had ever heard before. And this little voice said, sweetheart, you're going to have to quit your job. And I was like, who's that? And I started arguing with the voice. I can't quit my job. Are you kidding? I'm the full-time breadwinner for this family. My husband isn't working. I have a newborn baby on the way. I went to school for 12 years. I have $200,000 of debt because of this. I can't quit my job. And the voice says, you don't have to do anything right now. You just have to make peace with what's true. It took me a whole lot of trauma. I came to call it my perfect storm because I gave birth to my daughter, and within a few days, my 16-year-old dog died, and my father was sick. He had a brain tumor, and he had come out to be with me during my C-section, and my brother had come out to be with my dad, and my brother, as soon as he got there, started having severe right upper quadrant pain and turned bright yellow, and it turned out he was in full-blown liver failure as a rare side effect of the antibiotic Zithromax that he was taking for a sinus infection. And he wound up on the transplant list. And with a few days after that, my father died. And I came to call it my perfect storm. And it wasn't until a year later that I quit my job. And it was a huge risk. I I won't even get into the whole story. My next book comes out in December called The Anatomy of a Calling, and it's the whole story of what led to that and what happened afterwards. But I want to move past that because I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we start doing brave things because we start hearing little voices that tell us things like, sweetheart, you have to quit your job. Or, sweetheart, you have to say yes to that dream. And it's a very different voice than the one that argues with that voice. I call it your inner pilot light. So I want to introduce to you a concept that was introduced to me by one of my mentors, Martha Beck, who wrote a great book called Finding Your Way in a Wild New World. And in this book, she talks about what she calls the team. And she describes team members. She talks about this team as a gathering force of people who are here to heal the planet, to heal humanity, to heal the animal kingdom, to heal the rainforests. There is a group of healers that are gathering. So the fact that you guys all raised your hand when I asked you that question in the beginning is a signal to me that there's a whole lot of team members in here. And I want to see whether any of these characteristics of the team sound familiar to you all. Those of us on the team have a sense of mission involving a major transformation in human experience. We have a strong sense that whatever that mission is, it's getting closer in time. We have a compulsion to master certain skills in preparation for this half-understood personal mission. You're suddenly like, wow, I need to learn Chinese. I don't know why. I think I'm going to buy a cowboy hat. I have no idea why. We have high levels of empathy, as well as an urgent desire to lessen the suffering for humans, animals, and plants. We have a loneliness stemming from a sense of difference, despite being generally social. These are the traits that Martha says almost every team member has, and then there's some others that you may or may not resonate with. Some others are high levels of creativity, an intense love of animals, a difficult, often abusive or traumatic early life, an intense connection to the natural world, resistance to religion accompanied by a strong sense of the spiritual, high levels of emotional sensitivity accompanied by a predilection for anxiety, addiction, or eating disorders, a sense of connection with particular cultures, languages, or geographic regions, a brain-centered disability, a brain-centered disability like dyslexia, retardation, or autism, a gregarious personality contrasting with the need for periods of solitude, a persistent or recurring physical illness, a tendency to dream about healing others. So I'm curious, how many team members do we have in here? Raise your hand. Go team! Yeah. So one of the exciting things about being a team member is that this means you are either on or about to embark upon what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey. And this is not an easy path, but it's an incredibly fulfilling and rewarding path. For those of you who have not heard of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, this is the version that they talk about in the writer's journey. It starts with a call to adventure, and I'm not going to go through all of the steps in this, although my book, The Anatomy of a Calling, uses this map as a roadmap of knowing what it's like to get in touch with your calling, to find and fulfill your purpose. But it starts with a call to adventure. And you notice after the call to adventure, the ordinary world is the first step. That's where you're walking around, you're going to your corporate job, you're sitting in your cubicle, you're following instructions, you've done what society told you to do. You suddenly realize, wow, I'm not feeling very good. I'm not feeling particularly fulfilled. Is this it? And of course, you guys have already passed that part because you're at World Domination Summit, and we are a group of unconventional and remarkable people. So most of you are probably not in the ordinary world anymore, or maybe you still are, and you're 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But it starts with that call to adventure. And you notice after that, we have the refusal of the call. How many of you have had the call to adventure and refused the call? How many of you have had the call to adventure and said yes? Yes. Well, as you see, once you say yes, it is not over. Fortunately, we meet mentors, but we also meet allies. We also meet some enemies that are trying to make things difficult for us, you know? The food babe talked about the haters. It's not always easy. We have the road of trials where we are trying everything, where we're, we're going down those paths and we run into lots of cul-de-sacs. This is really normal. We ultimately end up in some of these ordeals, like my perfect storm, like what Chris is going through, like many of the other speakers have talked to you about, these real ordeals where we come face to face with some of the real shadow parts of life. And it opens our hearts. It gives us courage, and we ultimately are able to find in our own way whatever the Holy Grail is. But we don't get to keep it. You know, many of us are tempted to try to keep the Holy Grail close to us, but our role as heroes is to then bring it back home, to take it back into the ordinary world, to return with the Holy Grail. I ended up leaving medicine, and I thought I would never go back. But I went through my own hero's journey, which actually turned out to be a heroine's journey, because it was very much of a journey of embracing the divine feminine. But it led me right back to where I started, and I'm now training physicians and other healthcare providers in a school I started called the Whole Health Medicine Institute. We have some of our graduates here in the audience today. And it's been an incredible journey that, like I said, I don't have the time to get into. But I know that kind of hell and back journey that many of us experience in our careers may lead us to leave. And we may find that, in fact, we are the very people that have been called to serve those in our own professions. Ultimately, what I realized is that the hero's journey is a journey from the head to the heart. When you're on this kind of journey, it feels like you're chasing butterflies all the time. I want to redo this slide, though. It says utter nonsense, and the heart is like, skip to my loo, off following butterflies. And the head's over here saying, this way, heart. And I've had so many times where my mind is saying still, this way, heart. But really, they should be crossing out utter nonsense, and it should say your true path. Because the heart will always lead you home. And it requires great courage. So my last book was called The Fear Cure. And in The Fear Cure, I talk about what it is that makes us afraid to follow our callings, to say yes to the call to adventure, to say yes to that little voice inside of you that might be asking you to do brave things, that might be telling you that you need to get out of a toxic marriage, or you need to step into your life purpose and finally say yes to going to art school, or you need to finally take a leap of faith and quit that soul-sucking job so that you can step into your purpose. That voice that might be telling you what you really need in order to heal if you're dealing with an illness. That voice is a trustworthy voice, but it feels like following butterflies. And the reason it can be so scary is because we have, in our culture, we've made decisions about our worldview that I call the 4 fearful assumptions. And we've come to believe that uncertainty is unsafe, that we can't handle losing what we cherish, that it's a dangerous world, and that we're all alone. And no wonder we're scared if we believe that we're all alone in a dangerous world where uncertainty is unsafe and we can't handle losing what we cherish. But I've come to develop a whole other worldview. I discovered a word recently called pronoia. Have you guys heard this word? It's the opposite of paranoia. It's the belief that everything in the universe is conspiring to support you. So I now follow what I call the 4 courage-cultivating truths. What if uncertainty is the gateway to possibility? What if loss is natural and can lead to growth? And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't bear witness. to our own loss or the loss of others. But as we saw, every single one of us here has experienced it. And for many of us, loss is what cracks us open. We can either break down or we can break open. What if it's a purposeful universe? You know, Einstein said the most important decision you'll ever make is whether you live in a friendly or hostile universe. My publisher didn't like friendly universe. They said, how can you say we live in a friendly universe when there's genocide? So that was our compromise. What if it's a purposeful universe? And what if we are all one? And all of the mystical traditions teach this, and now science is catching up. The science of consciousness is showing that, in fact, perhaps we are actually much more interconnected than we ever thought. And for me, if I believe we're all one in a purposeful universe where uncertainty is the gateway to possibility and loss is natural and can lead to growth, it helps me be brave. And that's necessary when we talk about what I want to talk about briefly next, which is the karass. Have any of you heard this word? So Kurt Vonnegut in Cat's Cradle talked about the concept of a karass. And a karass is a group of incarnated beings whose job it is to bring into existence one of God's holy ideas. Now, he contrasts this to the Grand Falloon, which is a group of beings who think they have something in common but have absolutely no spiritual bond whatsoever, like the Harvard class of 1993, or the Republican Party, or Mets fans. So part of finding and fulfilling your purpose is recognizing that we are all here as a group of incarnated beings with a job to serve a holy idea. And my karass, I'm part of the karass to heal healthcare. But there's another karass about reforming the legal system, and there's another karass about saving the rainforest, and there's another karass about stopping sexual violence against women. So I just want to encourage you, while you're here, start looking around. Who's in your karass? Recognize each other. Say hello. And be brave enough to acknowledge your role in your karass. We need you. We need you to be brave enough to stand up and step into your purpose. So I'd like to just ask you in closing if you all would be willing to stand and hold hands. Because in truth, we're all part of one karass. All right, let's be quiet while we hold hands. I know it's so fun. Everybody wants group hugs again. I'd just like to ask all of us here to recognize the power of community as we step into our spiritual purpose, as we say yes to our callings, as we find our karass. Now more than ever, the planet needs us. Humanity needs us. The animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the earth, the mountains, the oceans need us. And we are the only ones who can change this, and it starts by shifting consciousness, and we're doing it right here, right now. And I just want to encourage you to have the bravery to use your voice, to use your gifts, to say yes when you get the call to adventure, and to call upon one another, because we can't do this alone. We need each other. Anais Nin said, and the time came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. So I want to just invite everybody here to take just one step. Sometimes that's all we see. We just see the first step. We don't need to know where we're going. We just open ourselves to the guidance that shows us what's the next step. And when we see it, to have the courage to say yes. Thank you.